Hi, my name is Jennifer Matos. I am the Executive Director of the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society, and I'm bringing you the 16th edition of our Armchair Tour of West Hartford history. I'm here today on Selden Hill, which some of you may be familiar with. There is a Selden Hill Road, but there's also a Buena Vista Road that leads up to this hill in the western part of the town, and it has a neighborhood that is known as Buena Vista. Now, if you're an old school West Hartford person, you might know of the neighborhood as Buena Vista instead. If you're a more recent resident of the town, you might call it Buena Vista. And of course, it gets its name because of this amazing view. So I'm standing here in the backyard of one of the oldest houses in the neighborhood. It is from 1840, and it was owned by Henry Selden. It's an old farmhouse that still stands here and still has an amazing view. So behind me, you can see the city of Hartford. You can see Wood Pond and Woodbridge Lake. So you really just have this beautiful vista here, which is where it gets its name. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the history of the neighborhood, and I'll tell you a little bit more about exactly how this name came to be. So if you remember from previous episodes that West Hartford was not its own town until 1854. It was, prior to that, it was considered to be the West Division of Hartford, so it was all agricultural. And so the Seldens were one family that had a farm here in town, and they lived in the West District. So up here on the hill, they would have been pretty much the only people living here for quite a long time. I looked at a map from 1896, and Henry Selden's house is here up on the hill, and then there's one other Selden living up here as well. So hence the name Selden Hill, because the Seldens owned this property. They really were living here kind of by themselves until the end of the 1800s, and in the end of the 1800s is a time of really great change for West Hartford. So as we've seen in previous episodes, there's a lot of immigration coming to the city of Hartford. Middle-class residents were able to move out into the suburbs of West Hartford. And so at the end of the 1800s, you see a lot of land being sold, a lot of farmland being sold and developed into suburban residential areas. And so the neighborhood of Buena Vista was actually one of the first neighborhoods to be developed in town. One of the things that led to the appeal of this neighborhood in particular, besides its beautiful view, it also was on the trolley line. So there was a suburban car service that ran from the city of Hartford at the old State House and ran the whole way through West Hartford to Farmington and actually ended in Unionville. So this piece of property was bought from the Stanleys, and Stanleys was another name in this area. And in fact, there is the Edward Stanley house that still stands lower on Buena Vista Road. So the Stanleys owned this large piece of property that fronted Farmington Avenue, and they sold it to a developer. And the developer really got rolling in advertising this great new neighborhood called Buena Vista. Now, the name Buena Vista actually comes from another resident. His name was Benjamin Desjardins, and he moved to the area in 1892. He was Canadian born. He was an inventor. He lived throughout the United States, and he had come to the Hartford area and actually bought a cottage here in this neighborhood as a summer house, and he had a full-fledged laboratory attached to it so he could work on his inventions. So he is actually credited with coming up with the name Buena Vista. That is the name he called his property, and it stuck, and obviously it was a very appropriate title since it does, this whole area has just such a beautiful view. So the developers took the name Buena Vista, and they really went to town trying to advertise this new residential area. They call it Hartford's best new suburban development. This was a company that had it had offices in 15 cities in the U.S., including one in Hartford. They boasted having created 40 successful suburban developments in 7 different states. So they had a proven track record of developing land for the suburbs. And again, something very appealing to the people who would be moving to this area was the fact that it was right on the trolley line. So this meant that if you were a businessman working in Hartford, you could still work in Hartford every day and take this trolley line to the city and then come back home to your beautiful pastoral home here in the suburbs of West Hartford. Another selling feature was its proximity to Reservoir One, which people consider to be Hartford's most beautiful reservoir. So it had frontage, right? The lots that were right on Farmington Avenue overlooked the reservoir, which was also really appealing. The advertisers spend a lot of time talking about the plots, how the land had been graded and there were streets being built and sidewalks were going to be happening and shade trees where necessary. And so it really painted this, very ideal location for people. Now it's interesting that the size of the lots were very small, and they ranged in price from $50 being the cheapest lot to $200 being the most expensive lot. The company would work with you for payment. So if you were buying a $50 lot, you'd have to put $1 down as a deposit, and then you'd pay 50 cents per week in order to slowly own this piece of property. If you bought the higher end, if you bought a $200 lot, you would have to put $2 down as a deposit, and you would have to pay $1.35 per week. Now, while you were paying off your lot, the property company would be paying for your taxes. They also had an extra incentive that would give the purchaser life insurance. So upon your first payment, first down payment for the house or for the property, you would have a life insurance policy opened up under your name, and it would be for the total amount that you were to pay. And this was only for people who were healthy, so they had some restrictions. But if something should happen to you and you would pass away before you had paid off the house, it was an agreement that the title of the house would go to your heirs, and the rest of the payment would be deleted. So you would have that option as well. The other thing that the developers did is they actually made a deal with the trolley system, so that if you lived here for the first 5 years, you would be able to get a reduced fare on the trolley. So they had brokered a reduced fare of 5 cents per trip from West Hartford to Hartford. And then they even threw in a sweetener, and they said, well, the first year that you live here, we'll actually give you free trolley service for the head of the household for the first year. So they were trying to make it very attractive for people to come here to this area. And if you can imagine, it really was just farmland. There really wasn't anything else here except for this, a couple Selden houses and maybe a Stanley house or two. So I went from my research from looking at the 1896 map to looking at the 1917 map. So we're looking at 50 years later, pretty much. And in 50 years, most of the lots in Buena Vista had been purchased, but not a lot of them had actually been developed on. So you can imagine the lots that are kind of right on Farmington Avenue and overlooking Reservoir Number 1, those went the fastest, and by 1917 there were 5 houses built on that strip. But for the whole rest of the development, there were only about 5 houses total built at that point. So a lot of the development in this neighborhood, the actual building of the houses, is going to be happening in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and even more recently. It's also interesting to note that in the advertisement for the neighborhood, the company definitely encouraged people to think of this as an investment. So they encouraged people that even if you were not sure that you wanted to build a house or you're not ready to build a house, you should go ahead and buy the property because it's a really good investment. And they were offering that they thought that you could double your money on one of these lots. It was such an attractive area. The other thing they did is, so officially the neighborhood opened up in October of 1895 to sell the lots. And they actually encouraged people not to wait, but to go right out, take the trolley to Buena Vista, pick out your plot of land, and they were having agents on site every day, even Sundays, to be able to talk to you and get everything set up for you. So it's interesting that Buena Vista was really one of the first really organized neighborhoods of West Hartford, and it's kind of almost a hidden secret, because today, because of Farmington Avenue, you wouldn't really need to go up Buena Vista Road. It's kind of off the beaten path. It's ironic to think that it originally was the major thoroughfare going to Farmington and back. But today, unless you had a reason to go up here to this neighborhood, you might not ever know it was here. And there's some really interesting architecture, really beautiful houses from different eras. And of course, we have this beautiful Selden house, the Henry Selden house from 1840, that's still standing here. And imagine all the change that this house has seen over time. We actually know that Henry Selden, besides being a famous farmer here in town, actually operated the first ice cream parlor in town, and he operated an ice cream parlor from 1895 to 1901. His parlor was located on Farmington Avenue, and they made the ice cream in-house. They had 12 different varieties, which they used their fresh cream, sugar, and flavorings to make this ice cream. And I'll post a picture. We have a really great picture of Henry Selden in front of his ice cream shop that I think you will enjoy. So I hope you learned a little bit new today about Selden Hill and Buena Vista or Buena Vista, and I'll see you next week. Thanks so much.